Hi guys, hope you're doing well. Earlier in the month, a developer blog was released for Isonzo, and on the developer blogs, basically, it is new information about different features in the new game. But this month, they did what I think was probably the best developer blog yet, because they've gone into in depth into what the game mode is, and it gives you some background idea for the game in general. So I'm going to go through that today. I'm a bit late to this because I've been away for 2 weeks, but I hope you enjoy nonetheless. Thanks for watching. So I'm going to read it out and then we'll go into it properly. So this is from the devs themselves. We describe the basics of the offensive game mode in our first Isonzo intel. In short, one team will be attacking while the other team will defend. The attackers will need to capture points and demolish key objectives, while the defenders have to stop them. Additionally, offences are split into multiple battles where the success or failure of early fights can influence later ones. There is more in it to this though, or more to it than this, should I say. For instance, both attackers and defenders can establish forward posts which allow respawning closer to the action, and the forward posts for the defenders can be demolished by attacking troops. This demolition applies to other aspects of the defence too. Heavy machine guns causing trouble, storm a position and sabotage them to make them permanently out of play. That sounds really interesting. So there's some really interesting things to pick out there from this sort of first little bit of the blog. So obviously the game mode's called Offensive, for anyone that didn't know or didn't understand what I read out there. And by the looks of it, it's fixed in terms of one team is attacking, one team's defending, a bit like Verdun. But I feel like what they mean by that is one team is attacking for the whole game whilst one team is defending for the whole game. I don't think it's like Verdun in terms of where you attack for one sector and then you defend the next. I think it's definitely all the way through the battle. It's going to be one attack, a team, and one defending team, which is an interesting change to gameplay. We've not seen anything like that from WW1 game series yet. Second thing I want to pick out is that you can demolish and capture objectives now, that's really interesting. Obviously, capturing objectives, we've seen that in manoeuvre game modes where you have to go around different points of the map and hold and run their ticket points down at the top. But the demolish aspect sounds really interesting. I wonder if we're actually going to see some explosions in this game and how they're going to work that. That'll be really interesting to look at. Another thing they also mentioned is multiple battles, meaning it can influence the gameplay. So I'm wondering, is there going to be sort of different stages within one game, if that makes sense? So one whole match has different battles within that match and different sectors. A bit like Verdun, for example, it's not just between one trench. You can fight between 4 or 5 different trenches sometimes. But what they did say is whatever happens can influence the gameplay later on. So maybe if you lose a certain sector later on, it's going to influence the gameplay further down the line, which is amazing. It makes it more dynamic. That is perfect for bringing forward the immersion in the game. You've got forward posts for respawning, which can be demolished. That's really interesting. Again, looking at that demolish aspect, I wonder how they're going to work that. Are we actually going to see some real explosions in the game, which would be really, interesting to look at? And the forward posts for respawning, well, we've seen that in Tannenberg. For example, when you capture certain areas, it means you can spawn closer to the next area you're going to capture, and if you start losing that, you lose that spawn zone. So I suppose we've seen that in Tannenberg a bit as well. But again, it's a good mechanic if it's done well, though, because we know what the spawn in Tannenberg's a bit dodgy sometimes. Then it also says you can permanently disable machine guns, which is really interesting because we've never had that in any of the games yet. So what I've decided to do now, instead of reading the whole blog out, I'm just going to read out the specific points because I don't think people have enough time to listen to me ramble on for an hour. So this is looking at more of the objectives in depth. So demolishing objectives is done by using Gallatin tubes, which I believe is the type of dynamite you use in this game mode, and they are timed, meaning it can be diffused. So the defenders have the opportunity, even once planted by the attackers, that they can defuse that dynamite, which is going to lead to some really intense battles, especially if it's in urban settings or mountainous settings, which this game is. It's going to be. I think it's going to be. The battles are going to be amazing. I really can't wait to see them. Some of the objectives include artillery, bunker fortifications and ammo dumps, so they're the type of things you're looking to blow up. Now, in the offensive game mode, there's two things. So you've got your demolition points, which, as I've just mentioned there, but you've also got your objective capture points. Now, according to the devs, the capture points are going to work in a similar way to Tannenberg, in terms of the more guys you've got into that capture point, the quicker you take that capture point, the quicker you have your influence in there. And according to the devs as well, if you've got that capture point, you can then actually start spawning your teammates on there, which is really good. And obviously, again, it keeps up the intensity and the immersion of the battle. But the differences between the demolition points and the capture points is that the defenders can counter-attack the capture points, because the capture points aren't permanently held. You know, once something's been blew up, that's it. It's out of the game. So it leads the question from the devs is, what do the attackers do? Do they try and go for the more damaging demolition sites? Do they try and take that first, which is arguably the more difficult option, or do they go for the capture points and work that way around? So it's really interesting that they've left that open to the players to decide, and they've got that sort of dynamic bit of gameplay in. I was just thinking more about that last point as well, about the fact that you can choose which way to go. I think that's going to really depend on if you're playing in a big group of players and they're all communicating, or you're playing more as an individual player, because I suppose I can imagine the capture points are better if you're playing as a team. As I've said, you know, the more players you've got in that capture point, the quicker you take that point, and the quicker you can actually start spawning guys up there. So I think, to me, that makes more sense to go to that place if you're playing with a group of players that, as I say, are all communicating. But if you're playing as an individual and you're not communicating really too much with anyone, then you can go to the demolition site and just try and be as much as a lone wolf and just cause as much damage as possible doing that. And I think it's really good that they've left that element in the game, because, as I mentioned recently about my in the Tannenberg videos, that a lot of people don't always play in big groups of players. A lot of guys do come on and they're just individuals, are playing as an individual, which is good that they've got a bit of both in there for everyone. I think you need that in World War I game series. I think you need that in all first-person shooters personally. I think you need that mix of both team player orientated stuff then individual orientated stuff. So the blog goes on further, and it talks about how if a line of defences is captured, there's a pause in the game which allows sort of for a minute where the defenders can start constructing more defences or sort of fix the defences, this is a really interesting concept, because we've never seen this in World War I game series, and this is where a lot of people have talked about sort of it's got an element of Battlefield in it. It's got an element of like other games, like if you've seen on Squad, where they build gun nests and stuff. So basically, according to devs, engineers can repair gaps in barbed wire, construct additional heavy machine gun nests, which again is that sort of element from Squad, and I think there's a few other games where you can do that, as well as other measures. And apparently there's going to be more information released on that specific point, but this is probably the most, for me, out of everything, that's the most interesting point we've heard so far, because there's an actual there's a role there, so obviously there's going to be some engineers on certain squads, and they've got a massive role in terms of reorganising their team and getting those defences ready for the next onslaught, which is, it's going to be really interesting how they're going to even do that. And I'm wondering how the machine gun nests are going to work. Can you put them anywhere? Is there only certain places where you can build them? And who can use those machine gun nests? Is there a certain person in the squad who has to use them? So it leaves a lot of questions open, and we're going to hear more about that in the future, but that's a really interesting element. The dev blog also talks about how attackers only get a certain amount of reinforcement tickets, and if those all run out, or you're capturing an objective, or the dynamite's been planted and the time's running out, an overtime can be triggered. Now, the description of that to me is not too clear, and I want to see. I think for me, I'm someone who learns by doing things in person, or actually getting my hands on. So I'll have to wait to see how that's going to work in the game. I imagine it's going to work similar to how Verdun. If you're at the very end of the timer on the trench, but you've got loads of guys in and you're close to capturing it, I think it's just like an onslaught battle till whoever's got the most people left in the trench wins the game. So I think it's a similar element to that, but we'll see when it comes out. I don't want to really go into too much detail on that, because I don't fully understand how it'll work myself. But it's interesting. Again, I'll have it linked in the description so you guys can read it yourselves. And then the very final part of the blog just goes into more about how they've sort of the historical context of the game and things like that, and how one side is definitely attacking for the whole game and one side's defending for the whole game, which is similar to what I said at the beginning of the video. So that sort of confirms our suspicions there. So that's my complete breakdown of the most recent dev blog. I'd love to hear your comments, what you think of it, what you think it's going to be like. And again, we're going to hear some more information soon, especially on that sort of, on the I think it was the defense engineers and rebuilding stuff. Apparently we're supposed to hear more information about that in the next dev blog, and I'll have that released on the channel. I'll also be getting Isonzo when it's out. I'll be streaming it, I'll be doing reviews for it and stuff, so if you're interested, stick around for that. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed, cheers.